Remember? Anyone remember? We talked about superior autobiographical memory, right? And people who never forget anything. Oh, and I was going to find those clips. I need to find those clips so I can show you these folks because they're amazing. Last time, so we left off talking about depth of encoding. So the question is, what helps you remember? And we got a list of things that may or may not help you. So the first thing that we talked about was thinking about meaning, the depth of encoding. So not necessarily effort to encode, but the semantic processing that you do. So it's not necessarily that it's harder, because you can distort the stimuli, you can use those CAPTCHA things, and make it harder to remember the stimuli, or harder to perceive the stimuli, but not necessarily make it have any benefit on memory. The thing that does have a benefit on memory is thinking about the meaning of things. So somebody asked, well, in my experiments, how do I keep people from making little story associations between the lists of words that we use? And I sort of flippantly said we use 200 words on a list. And that's true. That's part of what we do. Is we use tons and tons of stimuli. But we also, when we're showing you these words, we'll have you do an incidental encoding task. So is this bigger or smaller than a shoebox, for example? Or is this living or non-living? Would you encounter this typically indoors or outdoors? What are some of the other ones we use? Those are the most common ones. So you're thinking about the meaning of every word. You have to think about what it means, and so you consequently, you encode it better, rather than if I just say, remember these for later. So I give everybody the same mnemonic strategy. So what if we do say, remember these for later? Does that actually help? So if you really, really try to remember something, does it help you to remember it later? What do you guys think? Have you ever forgotten something that you had intended to remember? So obviously it doesn't work all the time, right? So you think, okay, I got to remember to do this, and then you forget about it. Or I need to remember this event, and then you forget about it. So it turns out that the intention or effort to remember something is completely irrelevant. Doesn't matter. So if we tell people, so it turns out that if we tell people, study this list of words, your memory is going to be tested on it later. Or if we just say, study this list, or read me this list of words, tell me if it's bigger or smaller than a shoebox. Doesn't matter. Actually, you tend to get better performance if you're doing the semantic encoding thing. Telling me if it's bigger or smaller than a shoebox. But if we control for that, if we tell both groups, I'm going to show you a list of words. I want you to tell me if they're bigger or smaller than a shoebox. One of the groups, that's all we say. The other group we say, oh, and by the way, we're going to test your memory for these words later on. Guess what? Doesn't matter. Both groups perform equally well. It doesn't matter if they know their memories test is coming up.
Question may be irrelevant, but can you make your memory, can you make it worse by babying it? Like, for instance, when something comes to my mind I know I need to remember, I always write it down right away and I keep this list so I don't have to actually try hard to remember things. So is that babying my memory so that I make it worse?
Maybe. So it may be the case that once you write it down, you don't think about it anymore. So you don't retrieve that information. So it turns out the best way to practice retrieving information is to retrieve the information, right? So this is called the testing effect. We remember the information that we're tested on better than the information that we just study. So if you don't have to practice retrieving it, if you write it down and then forget about it and don't encode it anymore, don't think about the meaning anymore, don't think about how it's going to fit in with other stuff, so that's all the processing you do, then yes, you are likely to forget that, unless you've got the paper there to remind you every once in a while. So I don't say necessarily babying your memory, but maybe not really practicing your memory. So it's just like any other skill. You've got to practice it in order for it to get better. Alex?
At least for me, I'd probably say she's doing more by writing it down to actually keep it in her memory than if she just told herself.
Oh, I got to remember this. And then you go on. Versus writing it down, you do have to process it a little bit more when you're writing it down. That's why it's useful to take notes rather than just to sit in class and try and absorb the information. Taking notes, you have to sort of filter through it and think about, okay, what is the meaningful stuff here? What do I need to write down? Yeah. So in both cases, though, you're going to try and remember the information, and it turns out that maybe doing this extra step of writing it down, or maybe doing this extra step of thinking about it, processing it more, is actually what's helping you, and not necessarily the intention of what is this kid doing? I feel kind of bad for him. Yeah, so this is some classic literature that just basically says exactly what I just told you. So this is a 2x2 experimental design. So you've got a group of people who are doing incidental encoding. So they're told do either the deep or the shallow encoding condition. So deep is semantic processing, rating the pleasantness of the word. Is this a pleasant thing or an unpleasant thing? Shallow is does it contain a Q or an A? The incidental folks, that's all they're told. The intentional folks, they're told, oh, and by the way, we're going to test your memory for these words later on. And it turns out that you get a main effect of depth of processing. So the people who do the pleasant, unpleasant rating remember more than the people who just do the surface. Does it contain a Q or an A? And the people who were told nothing about a memory test score as well as the people who were told that there was going to be a memory test. So this, again, illustrates depth of processing is important, and that's all that's important in this context. Your intention to learn the information doesn't actually matter. So a little bit of a caveat about this depth of process, though, because it's kind of a circular definition. So we know that you're processing things deeply if you remember them. And we know that you remember them better if you process them deeply. So how do you remember something better? Well, process it deeply. How do we know if it's deep processing? Because you're going to remember it better. So do you see how this sort of loops back around on itself? You're just saying the same thing. You're defining it in terms of the outcome. So this is a problem with the theory, not really a problem with the data, though. So the data are the data. We know that if you do certain kinds of processing, then you end up with better memory. Does that mean that we can predict, if I come up with a new task and say, okay, which one of these is going to be the deep semantic processing? We're probably not able to predict from that. So it's kind of a poor theory. Also, we haven't talked anything about what's going on at retrieval. And there are some ways that you can get better retrieval depending on the cues that you use. And so we'll talk about retrieval a little bit later on. We're just talking about encoding right now. All right, so thinking about meaning, good. Effort or your desire to learn, meh, maybe not so much. What about emotion? Do you have better memory for emotional material? What do you guys think? Yeah, okay, so some of your most clear memory, your best memories are for emotional events, right? So, Alex?
I would think that emotion also distorts memory.
Okay.
My mom.
So, this is a good question. So, I'm a memory researcher, and I want to study emotion in memory. How do I do that? How do I experimentally induce emotions? Kidnap your dog?
I think maybe one could be like embarrassing somehow.
Okay. Are IRBs going to go for that?
Maybe not.
Yeah, so this is kind of a problem with it.
Judgmental though.
Right, so you could have mild embarrassment, and maybe IRBs will go for that. Corey?
Scare people.
Okay.
You could do like, look for the background in this photo, and it's one of those photos with the demon face pops up.
Oh yeah, with the scary clown that comes up. Yeah. Eric?
Frustration we usually induce.
Okay, yeah.
Or also, I guess happiness. You could, give them $20 or something.
How about a brand new car?
Yeah, that's too.
So this is sort of deceptive, right? Because I'm not going to give a brand new car to everybody who walks into the lab. So, we can tell them that they're going to win a brand new car and then, take it away. So maybe we could study happiness at the first and then disappointment after that or something like that. Sort of this emotional roller coaster, which may lead to lasting psychological damage. Who knows? Tori?
I know that in actual emotion studies, I don't know about memory, but they use empathy. So movies and things like this that emotional, and so they assume people are responding to that.
Yeah, so there are actual movie clips that are rated and sort of normed according to how emotional they are. So there's I forget what it is. There's some movie clip that's rated as the most emotional scene in all of movie history. And they show that and get people, weeping in the lab and stuff like that. So it's kind of hard to induce really strong emotions, right? So the memories that you have, so the memories that you have that have an emotional component are probably pretty strong emotions. So we can do sort of studies for emotional stimuli, for example. So maybe do you remember spiders or that scary clown picture better than you remember more neutral stimuli, things like that. So maybe guns, for example. And guns tend to be remembered very well, even laser blasters, especially ones that were used first to shoot. Yeah.
Could you differentiate with the emotion? Like if you're talking about having them watch a sad scene and then having them do some type of a memory exercise, that would be in the presence of the memory, but it wouldn't necessarily be associated with it. I mean, what if have there things where maybe they tell them this really sad story about a drunk driver and he killed his whole family and everything, and you started naming details like there was a tree on the left and he was driving a Dodge, and then there was this and that and this and that, and then tried to work off of those where it was maybe more connected versus just you're really revved up because we had you watch this emotional scene, and then we want you to remember apple, 6, cherry, green,
right,
different things like that.
Yeah, so those are sort of dissociable, right? So there's the emotion, and then your memory when you're experiencing that emotion, and then maybe your memory for emotional stimuli. So those seem to be different from one another. And people have tried to sort of differentiate between the two. So inducing emotion and an emotion, how many N's do I need in there? Inducing an emotion, and then seeing what people's memory is like, versus memory for emotional stimuli, like guns and things like that. Era?
What about looking at case studies, like for big events like 9/11 or something? Have they looked at that?
Yes. What do I have a blank slide in here? Sorry. I think there's supposed to be data on this slide. Sorry about that. So yes, and I'll get to that in just a second. So those are sort of flashbulb memories, right? So everybody has really strong emotions to those events. So are those memories kind of different from normal everyday memories of lists of words in the lab and things like that? It turns out that if you're studying emotional stimuli, that's kind of a confound, because emotional stimuli, like guns, for example, tend to be active in scenes. So if you have eyewitnesses, for example, and you have eyewitness, testimony, eyewitness testimony, it turns out, is incredibly unreliable. You should never listen to eyewitnesses. They don't pay attention to the right things ever, because the right things in the scene, in the event, are the gun, for example. So they can identify the gun with which they were held up pretty easily and pretty reliably. Because what are you paying attention to when somebody's pointing a gun in your face? The thing that will kill you, the gun, right? So you want to know where it's pointing and what it's doing. You're not necessarily paying attention to the emotion of the guy who's holding the gun. You may not even be able to see his face very clearly. You may have obscured it somehow. So so people tend to pay attention to the thing that's active in the scene, i.e. the gun in this case. I'll talk more about eyewitness testimony, and I'll tell you how to get out of jury duty. Ooh, practical applications. Basically, just say, I don't believe eyewitness testimony. I'm a psychology major. So what about what about this other idea? So instead of emotional stimuli, what if we study emotion, inducing an emotion, and then lists of words, or maybe things associated with inducing the emotion? So you use exactly the same stimuli in both conditions, same list of words or whatever, but you induce a happy emotion by playing happy music, or a sad emotion. Or maybe you watch, I don't know, what's a happy scene from a movie? It's a Wonderful Life. Okay. Yeah, every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings. That's happy, right? And then you watch, I don't know, Old Yeller or something like that, where you're just streaming tears. And then you try and study a list of words. Is that really what we're interested in there? So here, you're not remembering happy or sad stimuli. You're sort of looking at the effect of the emotion on and its influence on memory. So that seems to be slightly different from what we're really interested in, right? So Larry Cahill and colleagues came up with sort of a brilliant compromise. So what they did is they showed people a vignette, so a series of slides, and there was a story that went along with the slides. And for half of the subjects, the story was pretty benign. Kid is going to visit his dad at work, so it's the kid getting ready, he's all excited, he's out the door, he's traveling to his dad's workplace. He gets to his dad's workplace, his dad works at a hospital. Am I telling this right? All right, I actually have this up here. Okay, so some subjects are told that when the kid got to his dad's work at the hospital, half of the subjects are told that when the kid got there, his father was operating on victims of a car accident, and then the other half were told that when the kid got there, the father was participating in a drill of emergency procedures that included fake operations or unrealistic dolls. So, horrific car accident, drill, right? Same pictures, same, just different story to go along with the picture. So the stimuli stay the same, but the emotional content of the stimuli is manipulated, is different. So which one are you going to remember better? The car accident, particularly if it's the kid who's in the car accident, right? So that's one version of the experiment where the kid actually gets into an accident. And it turns out that yes. So if you manipulate the middle part, so the beginning and the end of the stories, of both stories, is exactly the same. Kid's going to see his father, something different is happening at work, and then they all go out to Friendly's for ice cream afterwards. So, you and me and Friendly's, right? So, that's only funny if you're from the East Coast. You laughed at that. Never mind. You get it? Okay. All right, so you remember the emotional scene better. But the stimuli are exactly the same. So you're not remembering different stimuli differently. You're remembering the content differently because you attach different significance to it. So what about this idea of flashbulb memory? So maybe this is what leads to our crystal clear memories of 9/11. Right? So these are known as flashbulb memories. So the idea is that you have this sort of indelibly stamped in your memory, this moment, where the event has high emotion, you remember the event completely, you remember lots of details about it, it's very accurate, and the resulting memory is immune to forgetting. Because normally, normal everyday memories we forget pretty rapidly. With flashbulb memories, they tend to stick. So, your memories for 9/11. You guys were how old then? 9, 10? Sad as that. What do you guys remember? Seminary?
That's when my mom hit my she was crying. I didn't know it was early.
Okay.
Our whole class was, when it was on the TV and there was an American flag by the TV and it was time to say the Pledge of Allegiance. So we were all saying the Pledge of Allegiance when the tower shot.
Oh,
I
wow.
remember that like distinctly, exactly where I was standing.
Okay, so very clear memory, very accurate memory of where you were. Okay.
I was actually sick that day, and so I stayed home. And we never watched TV in the morning, but it was on, and so that was really weird for me. And I didn't understand what was going on.
Okay.
I remember it being really quiet at recess. I looked up and there was no planes. But like the day after and like the day of, I remember those 2 days. It was super quiet. The skies were super quiet.
Yeah. Yeah, cancel all flights everywhere, basically. Yeah. Yeah, I had a friend who sort of jokingly on his syllabus said that, if you miss an exam, it's excused if you have a doctor's note or if the event is covered on CNN. And his student had a flight that day and missed coming back for his exam because of the events of 9/11, and it was indeed covered on CNN, and so he was stuck. It's like, well, this is in the syllabus. Danny?
My dad was actually scheduled to be at the World Trade Center Marriott, which is right at the base of that, for a business meeting in one of the conference rooms that morning with a company that was based out of World Trade Center. but he decided to reschedule things and move the meeting to Thursday instead of Tuesday. So
Oh, wow. Wow. So your memories for these events are probably pretty clear, crystal clear. So if I were to ask you, how confident are you that you remember the recess being quiet, or you remember the TV being on, and things like that, you'd probably rate your confidence pretty highly, right? But if I ask you for your for any other event in 2001, September 10th, 2001, what were you doing? Some of us may remember. But others, yeah, I don't remember what I was doing that day. That was a Monday, and I guess I'd have to go back and look at what my class schedule was. I was in college. I don't remember. So, yeah, so there seems to be a difference between September 11th, our memories for these flashbulb events, and our memories for every other day kind of events. And these have been studied. They've been studied with beginning with the JFK assassination. So if you ask folks in your parents' generation or your grandparents' generation, where were you when you heard about President Kennedy being shot, they'll be able to tell you. Similar to where were you when you heard about 9/11, everybody is sort of able to tell you. And so researchers looking into this come up with this conclusion that there's a special print now mechanism where you need to, if the event is emotional enough and salient enough, you need to remember it and it needs to be indelibly stamped in your memory. But is that really the case? Are flashbulb memories different than everyday other kinds of memories? So on September 12th of 2001, some enterprising researchers took a bunch of Duke University students and asked to write down the details of where they were the previous day. So on Wednesday, they're asked to write down what happened on Tuesday. Who told you where you were, what you were doing, etc., as well as the details of an everyday memory. A party, a sporting event, studying, something else that had happened within the previous week. They also collected emotion ratings. So how emotional are these memories? How confident are you in these memories? And then they test them later on. 1, 9, and 32 weeks later, and collected confidence measures in these memories. And what they found is that for the flashbulb memories and the everyday memories, the number of details, the number of consistent details that they get are approximately equal. So flashbulb memories are the solid lines, everyday memories are these dashed lines. And what you see is that very early on, so 1 week later, you get lots of details. So 12 or so details on average. But with everyday memories, you get this normal forgetting curve where, this is number of days, 32 weeks later, you're forgetting stuff. You don't get all of the details again. Same thing happens with flashbulb memories. Sorry, I was pointing at the wrong line. So this is everyday memories. Everyday memories on top, flashbulb memories. Here, the number of details that you have goes down. So you seem to be forgetting at the same rate with the flashbulb memories as you do with everyday memories. This would indicate there's nothing special about flashbulb memories. So how are flashbulb memories different? The confidence changes. So with flashbulb memories, you get higher ratings of vividness and higher ratings of confidence, whereas for everyday memories, you clue into it that, I think that I remember this stuff, but I'm not entirely sure. So you give it lower confidence ratings. But with flashbulb memories, you stay highly confident in your memory, even though your memory is getting worse. So that's the difference, is that you're more confident in flashbulb memories, even though the quality of the memory goes away at the same rate as normal in memories.
Would this have anything to do with revisiting the memory? Because
It has a lot to do with revisiting the memory. Yeah, so you may know people who have great memories for when they were kids, who say that they're able to remember when they were 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever. But these are also people who tend to remember those memories, who tend to retrieve those memories, right? So we talk a lot about what happened on September 11th, 2001. And so you get lots of opportunities to retrieve those memories. We don't talk ever about what happened on September 10th, 2001. And so you never have opportunities to retrieve those memories, and so they go away, you forget them. So it's sort of a use it or lose it kind of deal. That if you retrieve the memories, it actually strengthens those memories. and you remember the stuff that you retrieve. So I sort of mentioned this earlier, that this is called the testing effect. You remember the information that you're tested on better.
But then why wouldn't the how the like details be like why wouldn't the curve
So
be more leveled or go up? Yeah, why is that curve going down?
yeah, why would it go down if you're retrieving your flashbulb memory more than the everyday memory? My guess is that it's a problem in the design here, that you're asking people repeatedly, tell me about that sporting event you went to. Tell me about that party you went to. So you're getting an equal number of opportunities to retrieve the everyday memories. So they're both going to go down at about the same rate. So if you don't talk about either one of them, and then I test your memory for them a year later, then we'll probably see the same forgetting. But the problem is that you're not going to not talk about the September 11th. You're still going to talk about it, but the other one you can easily forget, right? You just never talk about it.
So in these tests, like, is the quality of the memory kind of established by you compare it to like certain facts that we have about the event, or how do you determine the quality of the memory?
So this one was determined. They had people come in a day after the event and write down what actually happened. So
they compare it to the original.
Right, exactly. So does your version of events now compare to your version of events a year later? And so that's how they figure out whether things are consistent or not. So part of the problem as a memory researcher is if I'm interested in autobiographical memories, and if I'm interested in your memory for when you were 6 years old, how do I know that you're not making things up, right? So how do I know you're supplying me all sorts of details? How do I know if these details are right? So how do I know that you were in fact saying the Pledge of Allegiance when you heard about the September 11th? I've got no idea. So I could try and track down other people in your class, but I mean, am I going to do that? Probably not. So it's kind of a challenge. So this is actually a pretty good way of going about it, just sort of getting around that problem. All right, so emotion does help. I don't want to give you the idea that emotion doesn't help and that flashbulb memories are no good. If you have highly emotional content, that you do remember that emotional content better. And that seems to have evolutionary advantages, right? So if you have some emotional event, you get very, very scared by the tiger, you're going to want to remember where the tiger is, right? So you want to remember that information better. So the brain mechanisms and the brain connections between emotion centers like the amygdala and memory centers like the hippocampus, well, it turns out anatomically these two things are right next to each other and have strong connections with one another. And amygdala activity really mediates hippocampal activity. So yes, emotional content does matter. What about repetition? What if you say something over and over and over and over and over again to yourself? From our serial position curve, that seemed to matter, right? So if I give you a list of words, you remember the ones at the beginning of the list because you're able to rehearse them over and over. But is it the rehearsal per se that's really helping you? This used to be a good example, and then everybody learned how to text, and so this turns out to be a bad example. So on a telephone, which key corresponds to the letter J? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And if I were to ask you which one corresponds to number 4, well, that's easy. That's the fourth one in, right? So you use the ones that you use, you remember. But it's not just the repetition. So this doesn't work anymore either because in order to text, you need these letters, and so they're sort of jammed in there. On old-timey telephones, does anybody know which ones we're missing? Q and Z. All right, here's a better example, though. Which one of these is correct?
The second line, second to the end.
Second line.
I don't actually know the answer to this, so I'm looking it up. All right, how many pennies have you seen in your lifetime? If you're a thousandaire like myself, then you've probably seen many, many pennies. Which one do you like? Second row, second one in? This one? How many vote for this one? I don't recognize any of them. I'll vote for it. That's actually correct. That is the right one. Who got that? Who got that without looking? Sarah did? Few folks did? Yeah, so if we, here, I'll switch over to here and show you what I'm looking at. So from Wikipedia, the source of all knowledge, In God We Trust at the top, Abe is looking to the right, Liberty, and the date. And then if we switch back over to looking to the right, Liberty, the date, In God We Trust. Good. So repetition obviously doesn't help us to encode this information. We've seen lots and lots and lots of pennies. So sheer repetition in and of itself is not enough to get things encoded into memory. You've got to do something else with it. So if you look at pennies and you think, you know, I could design that a better way, and you process it deeply, give it some semantic encoding, then that does in fact make a difference. All right, let's talk about congruence really quickly in a couple of minutes. Or no, I can't do this quickly. I can't do that quickly, sorry. All right, so let me stop here then. And we'll do a quiz, and then we'll be done a little bit early.
Good question. So we're unable, if you're using Wikipedia to figure out which penny is correct, it's still kind of hard to